With a play like Antigone, you have the general plot line, as I have said, that is very familiar. The audience would know roughly what happens. Little changes here and there, little suggestions that, shift around a little bit. A lot of artistic freedom in that. But the broad outlines of the story are kind of there. So you really don't need to, as a reader, especially, a modern reader coming to this and going, what the hell is going on here? You don't have to follow too closely to the plot. The plot just sort of hums along. And the plot of Antigone is not all that difficult. Basically, the daughters of Oedipus and Jocasta have buried the body of, or essentially Antigone, the one daughter, has buried the body of her brother, her two brothers, also the children of Jocasta and Oedipus, the fated curse of the mother-son incestuous, all that stuff. They have buried the body of the brother who was openly rebellious against the new king, Creon, who is their uncle. It's all just a big family soap opera. Antigone feels compelled to give the body proper funeral rites. Proper funeral rites are very big in the ancient world across civilizations. It's a real stamp of their society itself and their culture. But in this case, Creon, as a punishment, has decreed that no, you cannot give this. Leave the body out there for the dogs and the birds to eat and rip apart. And that is his punishment. He will be. This will be a curse on him in the afterlife, and it is also a warning to others who might be out wandering in the fields someday and see his body and think, "Ugh, that's gross. I don't want that to happen to me, so I better behave." And then, in the end, in typical Greek tragedy fashion, pretty much everybody dies. That's the plot. It's not that complicated. And there are going to be a lot of references that get thrown in that have you searching through the footnotes, and they're going to, toss out a line about this myth or that god or something like that. That's going to have you scratching your head. Just feel free to brush right past that. On a first reading, it's always good to go back and fish through those things in more detail, and they are surprisingly appropriate and meaningful when you do go back. But for just getting to know the thing, you just catch the outlines of the plot humming along there and understand that is Sophocles just sort of, feeding the audience kind of what it knows. It is only, I would say, the broadest outlines of a sweetener. You go to a play, you expect there to be a story. And so you sit there, and if the story is not gripping you, then it is a bad show. But on the basest level, if it is a good story, you're there for the show. And a good artist, a good playwright, knows this and says, all right, I got to give you a story, and here is the story. So they keep that in there. But then around that, interwoven with it, perhaps decorating it like a Christmas tree, are all these other little ideas that once you have the infrastructure of the story up, the artist can start to hang in there. And that's where the real magic happens. So when you're reading this stuff, don't grip to it so closely for the plot. you can read line after line after line and not know what the hell is going on, and then you find something, and then he gives a direct order for something to be done. It's like, oh, okay, that's behavior. That's what makes a plot. So that's important to me. That's generally not important. What's important is the little things along the way. Tracking that, being able to isolate that, tells you what the broader story is really about. The purpose for this show. Why did he choose to do this play as opposed to any others? There are countless plots to reenact among ancient Greek myth. Why did he single in on this one? What is he trying to say with this one that perhaps hasn't been said exactly that way before? Another hint that I give a lot of people is, generally speaking, well, I say an awful lot. When you want to get to know any work of literature, look at the beginning and the end. Look at the very beginning. The first lines are always significant in one way or another, and look at the very end, and those lines are very significant in one way or the other. And in between is just kind of connecting those dots. But that artists really tend to spend a disproportionate amount of their time crafting those first lines for some meaning and significance, and then really shaping the final blow of the final line so that, you deliver the knockout punch right there, and the audience just is overwhelmed as the play is ending. That's showbiz. With Greek literature particularly, however, I would say there is an addendum to that rule. And that is, the middle takes on great significance, almost to the point where whenever you get a reading from Greek literature, ancient Greek literature especially, take it right in front of you and then just open it exactly in the middle. And I'll bet you find something significant there. For our purposes, I would look at, and I encourage everybody else to look at, the middle of the play, where the plot has been essentially set in motion. You've got the characters on stage, and you know what's going on, and you get this a short series of scenes with some very interesting and curious arguments. Around on my page 735, you get Creon on stage, the King Creon. Antigone comes in. She has been arrested. She is arguing that, I would do it again if I had the chance. My personal integrity is more important than the rule that the king laid down. The king said I couldn't bury my brother. I decided that I had to, because it is right to honor one's family members. And she is interpreting a very personal ethics, and Creon is saying, but that violates the social ethics of the rule of law. He is the law, and so you must be punished for that. Those are the two perspectives being laid there, and they have this really curious argument about the responsibility inherent in this crime. Creon asks her, "You there, you bowing down your head towards the ground, do you admit it or deny you did the deed?" And she comes right out and says, "I don't deny it. I admit the deed was mine." Now, juxtaposition is always important, because this follows a kind of a comic discussion, a comic scene with a guard who has arrested Antigone, who is very concerned that he not be blamed, that he is, he saw what was going on or whatever, and he doesn't want to bear any responsibility for the crime or any contagion for the crime. If you just witness certain things in this culture, you bear a kind of stain. And he was very concerned. But she, in contrast, just comes right out and says, "Nope, that was me. I did it." Terrible witness for herself. Lawyers would be going crazy with that. But she just comes right out and says it. And then they have this really interesting discussion. And the character of that discussion shapes the real drama of the play. Creon saying, "And you had the daring to transgress these laws." And she says, "It was not Zeus who made the proclamation, nor was it justice dwelling with the gods below who set in place such laws as these for humankind." She's arguing that, well, no, there is a higher power than the laws of man. Familiar argument. The position of Creon is, well, no, I am the higher power. I have all the authority. You disobeyed me. He is all for this social construct of power, of authority, and she is saying, no, 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 there is something more important. And she feels that personal connection to the ideal that he is rejecting. For him, power is purely a social construct and absolutely must be respected as such. For her, not so much. For her, her personal judgment, intuited from an ideal source, is predominant. Curious. Why would they be having this philosophical argument right here? Is this really the appropriate place? She is basically on trial for her life here. It's not really a trial, but it's kind of a trial. She is going to be killed because of what she has done. And here she is, do you have anything to say for yourself? And this is what she's saying. She's not going on about how much she misses her parents and all of her problems and how she just wanted to help her brother or something like that. She is engaging in this argument that is very abstract. And Sophocles is writing it for her, writing this argument instead of bleeding out the human, family drama that is going on here. Yeah, it would be great to have her tearing her eyes out and, saying, "Oh, my daddy, and, the gods have cursed us and we are so forlorn and oh, woe is us." No, she is standing there very confidently saying, "No, I have a different interpretation of the way authority works. I have a different interpretation of who has authority here." And that's the discussion they're having. So if you're reading this and going along and saying, what the hell are they talking about? And why is this? And oh my God, these long speeches, stop and ask yourself, well, why? What are they talking about? And why is the play taking this turn? What is being accomplished here? What is the message here? Why are you doing this? Am I supposed to be frustrated and bored? Maybe. Antigone is arguing for individual responsibility. She accepts responsibility. In doing so, she is curious. She is exceptional. She is very different from the guard who had just been talking before. The guard is kind of painted as a comic figure. She is very composed, very dignified, and she is laying out a very compelling, I would say, intellectual argument. And of course, the elephant in the room of that scene is she's a girl, a woman. They go back and forth on whether she's a girl or a woman. More on that later. But she's got way more guts than the big tough guard from earlier. Imagine a burly tough guy who's used to wearing a uniform maybe and bossing people around. He was cowering, essentially. She is not. She is facing her fate with great composure and saying, no, what I did was right, and I'm not going to back down from that. So now, this question of the authority of the established power structure in society is coming down out of an abstract social realm, and it's playing out as a contrast between men and women. Because men have the authority in this culture. Women, especially in the ancient era, women were supposed to be quiet, docile, obedient. But she is not. She is also very composed. What happened to women becoming hysterical all the time? That word hysterical is itself, of course, very loaded with misogynist undertones. And more as this scene goes out, you get this curious flipping back and forth between arguing about the more abstract politics and social and ideological dimension of this argument, and also the much more domestic, gender-based, recognizable dynamic between men and women. On page 736, Creon says, This girl knew well how to commit an act of outrage when she first transgressed against the published laws, and here's a second outrage after doing it, to boast of it and laugh, exulting in her deed. Now, there's no real, you don't get stage directions in a Greek play. The editors here have included a couple, but you don't really get them. You just get the dialogue. So we have no evidence that she has laughed. In different productions, different directors and actors, they can make different choices, but there is no explicit reference to laughter in this moment. Is she boasting of it? I don't know. But again, it doesn't take long to see this guy is just so outraged that this young lady, this girl as he calls her, is getting a little uppity. Wait a minute. Why are you exhibiting such hostility? Shouldn't you just go back in the kitchen and do what you're supposed to do? That kind of attitude is breathing out of every line. He is just offended that she would break from anything that he, as the man in charge, both the king and the man, that he says. It's clear enough that I'm no man, but she's the man. That's really getting quite personal. He feels emasculated by her assertion. She is standing up for herself. She's not telling him that he's not a man, but her very act of self-assertion is challenging to him on a strictly gendered basis. No, whether she's my sister's child or tied to me closer by blood than all my household under Zeus, she won't escape from a most evil doom, nor will her sister, her bloodkin, the other whom I hold equally guilty in the planning of this tomb. Call her. Just now I saw her in a frenzy in the house, no longer in possession of her mind. So here he's calling out the sister, Ismene. The sister is not strictly guilty of the crime that Antigone is. She didn't really participate in the same way. But here, Creon doesn't really care. He is casting a broad brush over all conspirators here. And he is holding the sister equally guilty. And again, sort of throwing out this specific reference to family and to gender. Now remember, they are all family. He is their uncle. He was the brother of their mother, who was also, I'm not going into all of that. But the whole family is cursed, let's say, because of the prophecy of Oedipus. So it is this problem of everybody sort of turning in on one another. Everybody having a family dynamic that is very, very potent, and also the broader social dynamic. So you can't really read it just as a king and a girl, or a king and a woman, but it is also it's also a family dynamic. So it is both political but also domestic. Once again, that toggling back and forth between the relatively abstract and social and the very personal and intimate. And Sophocles' great genius is to be able to go back and forth between those two modes, weaving them together and creating something significant out of it. Notice also the little shot. Again, we have no way of seeing this. Ismene isn't even on stage, and maybe it's true, but he throws out the word, in a frenzy. He says, Creon says, well, yeah, she was in a frenzy back there. Maybe he was, maybe she's not. But again, it kind of has that tone of she's just getting hysterical. She's just a flighty girl. She's all over the place. She's so emotional and high-strung. Why can't she just calm down a little? Everybody should just be rational. That condescending mansplaining, if you will, tone is just dripping from this, and it's great. When they have this continuing conversation about the role of the personal and the political, the personal and the social, the individual and the group. Creon asked her, this view is yours alone of all these Cadmeans? Cadmeans is another word for her fellow citizens in the city of Thebes. Cadmus was the founder. And Antigone says, it's their view too. Because of you, they curb their lips. So in other words, she is the only one that has the courage to speak truth to power, but she knows that others are basically suspicious of it as well. And Creon comes back with the question, aren't you ashamed of thinking differently from them? Of thinking differently from them. Again, we're back to this kind of, this curious philosophy of obedience versus independence. The obedience of the king and the authority and the power structure and the social dynamic that locks everything in place, or individual thought. She is saying on the inside, everybody is an individual and has their own thoughts. The personal is opposed to the kind of received knowledge that we all have, those social dynamics that we all sort of grow up into, and we're told this is the way it is. And we may speak our doubts and hesitations aloud, or we may just keep them to ourselves. But imagine the audience hearing those lines and saying, yeah, well, yeah, I've got some doubts about the way things are being run. I've got some hesitations about that. What allegiance do I really owe other than, an insincere following along with the way things are? But on my own, I'm always thinking. And this little scene gratifies that internal rebellion. Because who doesn't want to think that, well, okay, yeah, I am my own person. I can have my own thoughts. And anything you tell me, I might go along with because it's convenient for me, or I just don't have the energy to oppose it. But it's insincere. And my mind is its own temple that you can't invade. That personal opposed to the social again and again and again. And you see these interwoven lines coming out, repeatedly. There is a stubbornness to it that when you're going along and you think, well, okay, it's going to progress. They talked about the women stuff for a little bit. Yeah, I get it. But put that aside. But then, boom, there it is again. Creon comes back, and he is outraged again that she is rejecting that Antigone is rejecting the social structure, the values of their society, the hierarchy of the power structure of the gods and the king. And he's always sort of blurring those. He mentions the gods more than just about anybody else. He keeps throwing out mentions of Olympus and Hades and all of this stuff, and the divine realm that he's himself a part of in terms of the authority structure. Antigone questions, despite that, Hades longs to see these laws fulfilled, the laws that she interprets of a divine nature protecting the bodies of the dead. And giving funeral rites. She sees herself in alignment with that, and he does not. He says, but good and bad should not share in them equally, because she is opposing the two brothers, the one who is a rebel, the one who is not. The one who is not the rebel is getting the funeral. The one who was is ordained not to. But remember, he has already come out and said that, well, no, I am going to punish the two sisters equally, even though they are not equally complicit in a legal sense. So he's a little bit of a hypocrite because he is a human being, not a god, necessarily. Not that the gods in the Greek pantheon aren't big hypocrites, but he is displaying himself to be very flawed here because he is applying justice very unequally. She responds, who knows if this is not deemed faultless down below? Creon says, an enemy is not a friend even in death. Antigone, my nature joins in friendship, not in enmity. Creon, if you must show them friendship, go and do so down below. But while I live, a woman shall not rule. So we're back to the woman thing. They were talking about, the ethics of obeying the higher power versus the secular power and all of that highfalutin stuff. And then it comes back to, but you're not in charge, I am, because you're a woman and I'm a man. Always coming back. Like, I thought we finished that. I thought we were done with that. No, you're never done with it. Sophocles is always bringing it back, always turning it over, because that's what this play is about. The plot is almost superfluous. And you can't tell me that, that's the way it happens. That's the historical record. You can't take liberties with that. Sure you can. And this is all myth to begin with. But even as myth, people change little details of the story all the time. This Creon is very different than the Creon we find in Oedipus, in the original drama, which was, scholars believe, generally written after this. This Creon is a little bit more wooden, a little bit more of a, jerk. Creon in Oedipus Rex is really more the fun uncle of Thebes. He's much more of a mensch, if you will. Here, it's a very different characterization. But all of this is just toggled a little bit around the basic substructure of the plot. The story is the story, and if people could feel free to get up and walk out at any point and they would still know how it works out in the end. But it's the little details along the way that Sophocles is using to explore something significant. And remember again the possibility of plausible deniability. All of this stuff of questioning power structures, of questioning hierarchies, of questioning, the male dominance of society. All of this is completely speculative. He could very easily come and say, well, yeah, that's just the way the play worked out. I didn't say anything wrong. No, you've just got characters arguing back and forth. Sure, Antigone is making some points that seem to challenge the patriarchal model for society, but she's a criminal. Who's going to take her seriously? Blah, 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 blah. He's got that sort of built in. But by making her so sympathetic, by making her so impressive, by making her by far the most impressive person in this play, we're kind of attracted to it and we respect it. We're drawn to that, and we start to say, well, yeah, I would do the same. I would have that kind of character. And once you make that leap, that abstract leap of your own, from the personal to the ideal, then you start criticizing not just the domestic realm of the play, but the broader social realm of your society. And that's what great art does. It gets you to focus on something down here that suddenly sucks you in, and you're looking at everything a little differently. You're looking at how things are. You're looking at the world around you and thinking, yeah, well, how did that get to be that way? Creon again and again argues that, well, this is just the way it is. He's always appealing to the gods. This is just the way it's supposed to be. This is the way God ordained that life be. Antigone is saying, well, no, I have a different idea about that. I have a different interpretation. This isn't the only way we can be. Maybe there are alternatives. Now, I am not saying by any means that Sophocles was a big, proto-feminist. But he is using his play to churn up questions. And you can say that well, clearly he's using this political story and this story of, the role of authority of kings to their subjects. He's using that as a kind of metaphor for the social dynamics of the patriarchy, of man and woman, and who's in charge there, and what rights do they have comparable to one another. You can do that. But you can also do the reverse and say that, well, no, he's actually dramatizing what is very identifiable for everybody. Not everybody in the audience, very few of them are going to be kings. So their reference point is going to be much more local, much more specific, much more close to the bone, much more domestic. So they can identify with the gender stuff, with the talk about marriage and family and the home. And use that as a stepping stone to the broader questions. That move goes both ways, and there is no one answer. But the pose of thinking about it, the position of saying, well, okay, what is going on here? That objectivity of established social norms, of viewing established social norms, that's the point. To get you to think about things just a little bit, to exercise your mind. Remember again, Sophocles in Oedipus Rex. He took the figure of of Oedipus, who is known for his mind, and made him a little stupid. The inability to see things clearly. This is a favorite pet topic of the entire Greek tradition, to be quite frankly. The exercise of one's reason, in contrast very often to established norms, or probably more often than not in most cases, the contrast of the ability to reason with an emotional response. That kind of, again, the thing about the the demeaning way that Creon characterizes hysterics, or women in this case, who are all in a frenzy or so emotional, whereas he is trying to be very reasonable. When you can make the argument that in this scene, he is not, because he's not really thinking very clearly, he is himself getting caught up in a kind of anger and emotion that his rule would be challenged by a woman. He is the one who is flying off the handle and can't handle that somebody is not doing exactly what he says at all times. At moments like that, I think we can all agree that the 2,300 years, or however long it's been since this play was first produced, it's not that long. This is pretty recognizable stuff. A lot of these plays get done today. You can see productions of a lot of the Greek classics today, because they are so universal, so elemental, and they can speak to the modern audience about very real topics. Here you have somebody standing up with a sense of individual character versus the power of the state. How much latitude do we have to question our superiors in society, our authorities? Where is the right of personal ethics or morals play in that drama? And I'll say this about contemporary productions also. Think about the role of just dress in modern productions in general of older work, not even just Greek works, but older works. A lot of productions these days will do stuff in modern dress, because the rationale is, well, we want to make it identifiable to people, and if they're walking around in togas, it's just weird. So we'll have them just wear jeans and t-shirts and sneakers, and everything will be good. And that way, when you see people walk on stage, you say, "Oh, okay, they look like me. That I'm involved already." But think about the mechanism of the show itself, of the art itself, where it's asking you within the play to abstract your thoughts a little bit, to think from the domestic to the social, to the divine, even, and all different connections between those, always taking an objective view. And to be objective about something, you almost naturally need some distance. And that distance can be created by the simple unfamiliarity of the show itself. And modern dress can sort of play into that. I'm not saying one way or the other, this is good, this is bad, but the function of this play, the purpose of this play, I would say, from I would argue that the purpose of this play is to get people to reconsider their received traditions, their received knowledge, and consider again, well, okay, Is that the way it's supposed to be? Can it be a little different? And in order to do that, you need to get outside your habits a little. You need to think a little differently. One of the geniuses of a class like this is we are confronting stuff again and again and again that is old and weird, and it's just distant from us. And we're, it can take some work to find our way in and say, well, all right, does this make sense? But that initial pushback of saying, this is odd, is kind of the point. Because the play is telling you to look at everything in society and say, well, this is odd. Why is it like that? What is the effect of it being like that? How am I being shaped by the fact that reality has this particular shape? Are my thoughts really my own at that point, or are they just the reaction of the forces around me? All of that is tied up in this stuff, and all of that is worth exploring, and all of that is the reason why we always come back to these things, because they let us butt our heads against different realities as exercise for butting our heads against, contemporary realities. Again, I'll bring it back to a very domestic sphere for everybody here, and that is the contemporary business world, where to have any effect, to have any power, to have the ability to get anything done, you need to confront established problems, established traditions, and ask yourself, how can this be better? How can we improve this? Does it have to be like this? And that is the basic question that the most successful people in the history of the world, in a commercial sense, certainly have always asked themselves. Steve Jobs came along with to Apple computers, and the computer was supposed to be a business thing. It was supposed to be very official and just a little bit difficult. And it's not for everybody. You got to be kind of smart to use one, because people in business are smart, and so we'll make it for them. And Steve Jobs came along and said, "No, I don't think so. I want everybody to have one. So we're just going to make using it a little bit easier. We can make, we'll make the keyboard and the actual frame of it a little bit more, a little bit prettier. We'll make the actual programming of it a little bit easier, and we'll make it do more fun stuff besides just, doing your taxes and boring stuff like that. Maybe we could have some fun stuff on there. That is the ability to come up and say, well, all right, does it have to be like that? And we find that model in these plays. We find that model in this art. We find that urge to come up against questions that are still with us today, and that can serve as models for how we deal with other questions which nobody can predict as they come up, as humanity progresses, let's say. But that practice of standing up as an individual against an entrenched system and saying, no, I've got a different idea, and I'm allowed to have that by reason of the fact that I can think of it, so I'm going to assert it, even at the cost of great consequence. Antigone dies. She pays a price for her independence. Pretty much everybody pays a price for independence. In this little scene, Antigone's fiance, who is the son of Haemon, who is essentially a cousin. Again, the family is always sort of the circle of this, and is always folding in on one another. He comes on the stage after Antigone and Ismene leave, and he's immediately like, okay, Dad, you want to kill my fiance? You go for it, because you're the man. You're the king, man, and it's my job to follow along. But he doesn't. Through that scene, he slowly comes to doubt it, and he slowly rejects it. And again, you're back and forth between these questions of the domestic and the political and the divine. Creon says, am I to rule this land by someone else's whim? Haemon says, there's no true city that belongs to just one man. Creon says, by law is not a city his who holds the power? Haemon says, you do well ruling in a desert by yourself. Again, this is a father and a son having a very abstract political conversation here, a debate. And you start to see how Haemon is starting to doubt his father's imperious ways. His father has set himself above society itself, like a god. And that is a bridge too far for poor Haemon, who ends up dead as well. Everybody dies in these things. It's that's why they call it a tragedy.